Are you joking? My disappointment was palpable. The culmination of sleepless nights, compounded by icy winds, and an unexpected cold snap that knocked out our heating system. This was the last straw that tested what little patience was left of my once angelic behavior. I reported my sister missing over a week ago, and after all this time you're telling me she might have run away? Is that all you have? Young women run away all the time, the police captain replied with a helpless shrug. And I checked Miss Amelia's social media and found that she is a very free-spirited woman. How many times did your sister change her address last year? Or boyfriends? Do you have any idea what kind of complaint I'm going to file against you? I hissed at the idle man in front of me. And wiped that condescending look off your face. If my sister's disappearance seemed normal, I would not have flown 3,000 kilometers, leaving my job to come here. I will not distract you from the very important game of solitaire that you call the computer of the last century. I'll be back tomorrow, and God help you if you repeat what you just told me. Admit it. Find her and bring her home. Walking out onto the smoky street, I was shivering from the cold. Just perfect. The wind turned into slanting rain. I confess that when my mother called in a hysterical state and said that Amelia had disappeared, my answer almost word for word repeated the captain's speech about the eccentric character of my sister Amelia. Amelia could plunge headlong into a new novel, forgetting about all her relatives. Or she found a new hobby in which she would become a genius, like that time with soap making. Before that it was ceramics. Amelia sold my TV and games console to pay for the pottery wheel. Then there was sewing. She hadn't spoken to our mother for weeks, too preoccupied with her new passion. Each time, my mother's world would fall apart and my little sister Logan would have to look for her older sister. Logan, you know how creative Amelia is. Logan, I saved up money for your semester, but you know how depressed Amelia is. She just needed to see the sea urgently. Moving to another city, 3,000 kilometers away from my mother and Amelia, was the most significant event in my life. I loved them with all my heart, it's true, but I was tired of always being the oldest among them. Yes, our father's death hit them hard, especially the way he died. Or rather, he was killed right in front of young Amelia. I was still just a child then, and the man whom everyone mourned did not leave a trace in my heart. At first, my mother spiraled, closing herself deep inside. Thank God for my grandmother's support. Otherwise, I would not have survived. There was simply no one to feed me. Those moments when my mother was in a good mood became the brightest and happiest in my life. We danced with laughter in the evenings, or watched movies until dawn, gorging ourselves on junk food. Sometimes we didn't have food at home, but in kindergarten and school, we were always the best dressed. Mom always found money for clothes. Amelia and I, despite the 5-year age difference, were best friends. Beautiful, sociable, bright. She was always a star wherever she was. She taught me to be the same, and if anyone dared to offend her little sister Logan, Amelia would not hesitate to fight back, not caring too much about her manicure. But after school she changed. We stayed close, but switched roles. Amelia needs a guide in the most literal sense, and I've been working at my grandmother's friend's market since I was 12. Someone had to finally bring the groceries home. I did not know my late father or the details of his tragic end. His killer was never found. I suspected that I had inherited his character, and Amelia took on the image of our slightly childish mother. Oh, how angry I was with my mom when she called me. What made Amelia disappear this time was where she went, to my college town. There was no vibrant nightlife or expensive boutiques, which I regularly sent her money to, just an old institute that I graduated from many years ago. At the moment when Amelia flew to this godforsaken place, my mother should have immediately told me about it. But no, she waited a week for her eldest daughter to deign to contact her. So what now? I could hardly believe that the entire police department would rush out to look for my sister right at that moment. They stayed for a week, not wanting to look for the already missing woman. The city was empty as before. I was even surprised that my institute did not close. The number of students in my course could be counted on one hand. What about ancient languages? Not really in demand. Modern translators earned much more than we did. But this place had the largest library. Some manuscripts in dead languages have survived in their original form. It was recommended not to even breathe too heavily around them, much less look at them from certain angles and with eyes wide open. The archivist fervently believed that the light could somehow reflect and damage the ancient texts. And our professors, well, that's a different story. Some of them were so old that it looked like they could be wheeled to lectures. We visited some of them at home or in the hospital. What to do? We wanted to learn. Although Amelia and my mother were angry with me for a long time after I moved to Brooklyn, just as I was angry with them for years of irresponsibility, I truly loved them. And now I was genuinely worried about my sister. Amelia lived with Aunt Nura in the same room in which I lived as a student. When I crossed the threshold for the first time after my arrival, I did not notice one simple thing. All my notes were upside down. I noticed, but it didn't seem important. I thought maybe Amelia was bored and decided to rummage through my papers. But now, looking at the remains of the mess with fresh eyes, I noticed one strange pattern. Amelia delved only into those works that mentioned the language of chaos, and for some reason bought a detailed map of the area. Of all the dead languages, chaos was considered the most lifeless. Some of my professors firmly believed that he did not exist at all. Strange parchments and skins with text were found in different parts of the world, but no one knew who spoke them. I made myself some coffee and started looking through the sheets of paper on which Amelia had left her notes. I wouldn't go bankrupt on sticky notes, I grumbled, looking at the ruined pages. I could not bear such carelessness. Out of despair, I almost wanted to tear my hands off. Every time she found a phrase she couldn't translate, she underlined the same phrase, or similar phrases in the script. Dawn will penetrate the moon, bringing death to the threads. This was my translation, but my professor strongly disagreed. Foaming at the mouth, he argued that this meant salvation, not death, and it was not a matter of threads, but something else. A standard situation in my profession. The final translation turned out to be the 18th version. This page looked like the observations of some old man, only neither the place, nor the city, nor the civilization itself was known to anyone. That is why the language was considered completely fictitious. The treatise on which I wrote my dissertation, or rather the couple of dozen surviving pages, was attributed historical value only thanks to radiocarbon dating. Otherwise, these pages would be considered mere childish scribbles. So the question is, why does my sister Amelia, an Instagram model who has masterfully presented her life as heavy luxury, need these pages of strange text written in the least understood language? It seems that she hastily left her place, flew here with her last penny, rummaged through my notes, bought sneakers and a tent, and then left in the evening and did not return. I slapped myself on the forehead. Tent. Aunt Nura mentioned Amelia's strange purchase after it turned out that none of her friends had it. I rushed back to the map of the area. She traced a 17-kilometer walking route from the train's last stop. It was not just the end of the world, but the very place accessible only to a proctologist surgeon. It was more than strange, but it seemed that Amelia was heading there for some mysterious reason. At the police station, my discovery was met as expected, with skepticism and eye-rolling. I wanted to hit them in the forehead with my heel. I whispered curses and curses at the detectives, long after I had signaled our corporate lawyer to prepare a complaint so brutal that their descendants would remember and wash away the shame. "Logan, go eat something." Aunt Nura called me to the table for the second time. "Thank you, Aunt Nura. I'm really not hungry." Aunt Nura left the room, muttering something under her breath, but I was no longer listening. My attention was focused on the map, marked with a red route. My sister, who was never adapted to extreme conditions, must have headed into that forest. The police didn't even plan to look for her. Then why am I here if not to follow in her footsteps? "Aunt Nura," I screamed, running into the corridor. "Is Peter, Sophia's grandson, still here?" "No. Why do you need it?" "He still has the car, right? He didn't get drunk, did he?" "No, Logan. What's wrong? You look pale. Did something happen? Should I call Peter?" Peter was the only person I knew in town who had a car. There were no rental services here, and it was barely possible to catch a taxi driver, much less find one willing to take me 40 kilometers into the wilderness, and then agree to accompany me into the forest to look for my sister. While Aunt Nura called her old friend, I ran to pack my things. I probably won't need a tent, but a charged phone for photos, maps, and warm clothes are a must. Peter picked me up half an hour later, clearly delighted to see him. I immediately remembered his purely boyish courtship during my student years. He even made plans to move to Brooklyn together and how we would buy an apartment there. For some reason, he was sure that I would earn good money, which in a sense happened, but only thanks to an old collector. my only client who actually paid good money for translations of ancient texts. To be honest, this guy was a little weird. "The weather is wonderful today, right?" Peter asked hesitantly as we left the city. "The weather is like any other autumn day prescribed by the doctor." Peter tried to engage me in conversation a couple more times, but after receiving harsh responses, he stopped. I understand that this was extremely rude of me, but I was absolutely in no mood to talk. All my thoughts revolved around my sister and the strange black melancholy that spread inside me as we approached the last station. Only now did the thought dawn on my reckless mind that it was getting dark early, and we would have to walk through the forest in pitch darkness. "Aren't you going to freeze? It gets cold here at night." Peter shuddered, looking at my light coat. "No, I'm not cold." Lighting the road with flashlights, we went deep into the forest. Until I left the house, I didn't really think about how exactly I would look for the trail. There were no landmarks, but Peter often went to hiking camps, so he easily found the trail we needed. I just walked behind, frantically scouring the ground, hoping to find some sign of Amelia. "Logan!" Peter's cry was like thunder in the night. "Look there!" The beam of his flashlight picked out a pale pile from the darkness of the forest. My heart was racing as I froze, trying to make out the shape. "Amelia?" "This is her tent." It was placed clumsily. It's strange that the wind didn't blow it away. She didn't even stab her properly. I rushed to the find. There was her backpack with several pages of my dissertation on the language of chaos sticking out of it, a couple of bags of chips, 2 bottles of water, and no sign of my sister. "Amelia!" I shouted into the darkness, hoping to hear her voice in response. "Amelia, ah!" "Shut up!" Peter hurried towards me, covering my mouth. "There could be bears around." "Let go." I shook off his hand. "Amelia may be somewhere nearby. She may need our help." "What's nearby? Where do you see at least one of her tracks? Amelia left here at least a few days ago." I looked again at the awkward tent and the things my sister had left behind. Where could she go? In fear, I tried to see in the night forest any traces of blood or something equally terrible. But everything seemed peaceful. What was it? A crashing sound came from the direction of the thickest thickets. I thought I heard a groan. "Logan, stop!" Peter shouted at me behind me. Driven by the thought that I was about to find my sister, and ignoring the warnings of my old friend, I ran towards the sound. As it soon became clear, straight into a trap. Branches lashed my face, scratching my skin. The air in my lungs was running out, but I continued to run, chasing the pursuing sound. Sometimes I thought I heard Amelia's screams, but they disappeared, leaving me with the feeling that it was just my desire and not reality. The screaming and the sound of footsteps died down. Even the moon was swallowed up by black clouds. My flashlight began to flicker. I stopped. "Amelia!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, completely lost. Wherever I turned, everything was the same. "Peter?" Through the trunks of ancient trees, the weak light of my friend's flashlight reached me with difficulty. It moved quite quickly, but he didn't respond. "Peter, is that you?" I shouted less confidently. The closer the light got, the brighter it became. A minute later, I was enveloped in a halo of white light, disorienting and blinding. I covered my eyes with my hand, but it didn't help much. My eyes just watered from the bright light, and then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. One moment I was standing in a circle of light, hearing a distant plane in the sky, and the next time I was again in the darkness of the night, among a forest, resonating in silence. The air itself seemed to change, sending chills down my spine. I tried to turn on the flashlight, but it completely refused to work. A wave of irrational fear kept me silent, despite my desire to call Peter. Slowly, step by step, I began to retreat, but it turned out to be useless. Everything looked exactly the same no matter where I turned. Peter would use the stars to navigate. I looked at them too, but it didn't help. Suddenly, the forest silence was broken by sounds unusual to the ears of a city dweller. Horses? "The rift was here," boomed a deep voice. "Find a newbie." "Newbie? Fault? Put your bow down, idiot. You'll kill someone in the dark." "I don't care. They could be dead. Find them." I heard the crack of a whip and the plaintive whinny of a horse. The surrealism of the situation threw me off balance. The noise of horses was usually heard from afar, but for some reason I missed it, and I screamed at the top of my lungs. Smart people don't drive through the forest at night. I froze, covering my mouth with my hands. They were clearly talking about me. There was no one else around, not even the sounds of Peter. And it seems my safety was not their priority. They were about 50 meters away from me, but every step I took was heard loudly and clearly. City dwellers are not known for silently walking through the woods. The news often reported about people disappearing in the forests. This made sense given the vast territory, but I have never heard of anyone being killed by horse archers. Sure, people engage in role-playing games with costumes, but can they go that far by immersing themselves in their personalities? I didn't want to find out. The night forest, the mysteriously missing sister, the horsemen, all this could not guarantee my safety. Everything inside was filled with fear. The language they spoke was familiar to me, one of the lost languages spoken by nomadic peoples known for their raiding and killing. If I were to put aside the crazy idea that these were indeed their descendants, who would bother learning a choppy dialect consisting mainly of guttural sounds? And as dead as the language of chaos, what if Amelia was with them? The smell of flowers. One of them inhaled noisily, and then spat with a grumble. There are no flowers in this forest. Young woman, she's here somewhere. There was no need for them to hide or move silently. Right next to me, I heard the crackling of dry branches and ran away from them, not caring about the path. Running away from the horses was a stupid idea, but the thick trees were my advantage. It will be more difficult for them to maneuver, but only slightly. Something flew past me and crashed into a tree trunk with a crash. God, those maniacs used real arrows. If I had known that cardio would be critical to my survival, I wouldn't have. My strength was running out. I tried to get out, feeling that my movements were weakening. The uninvited savior pressed me to him, and I bit my lip to hold back a cry. "Calm down and listen carefully," he said in a quiet but decisive voice. "I'll take you to safety, but you have to trust me. I know about your sister Amelia, and I will help you find her." My heart stopped for a second. About my sister? Who is this man, and how does he know about Amelia? "Who are you?" I whispered, gathering all my strength, but his answer was a simple action. He waited for a while, looking into the darkness, until the sounds of hooves disappeared, as if they had disappeared into the night. Then the stranger carefully released me. I turned around, trying to see his face in the light of the pale moon. But the shadow of the hood hid all features. His height was off the charts, and his entire silhouette radiated strength and confidence. "My name is Keith," he finally answered bluntly, "and yeah, I'm not from around here. I'm tasked with finding Amelia, and now you." My confusion only increased, but my instinct told me that Keith was not the enemy. We quickly and quietly continued on our way, making our way through the trees until we were so deep into the forest that I was completely disoriented. He had just saved me, but I was still trying to figure out whether he was the living embodiment of my protector, or, as the ancient legend said, my prince from unknown lands. But now my fear for my sister was stronger than any novel. However, his presence gave me new hope. "We're close," Keith purred, leading me to a small clearing where a fire burned brightly, fenced in with rocks. "Have a rest. Tomorrow we will begin our search at first light." I looked at him in bewilderment. Where did he come from? How does he know about my sister? Keith smiled, as if reading my thoughts. "It's okay, Logan. First you rest. Tomorrow there will be a lot of road and answers." Sitting by the fire and looking into the fire, I tried to remember the last time I felt so helpless. But now my helpless state was softened by Keith's presence. In the far depths of the forest, in its mysterious territory, among the stars and the smell of pine needles, I felt the beginning of something new, as if new chapters were being added to the pages of my life. The chapters are filled with adventure, and perhaps new love. As I sat by the fire, the hypnotic dance of the flames was in stark contrast to the chaos I had just experienced. My thoughts became a whirlpool, mixing my worries for Amelia with Keith's secret. Keith, whose very presence seemed to bridge the gap between the ordinary and the extraordinary, sat opposite me, the light of the fire reflected in his eyes. They contained depth and a story that I really wanted to unravel. Night drew on, and as the coals grew softer and my eyelids grew heavier, sleep finally took me. But it was a restless dream, filled with dreams of dark forests, mysterious princes, and whispered promises of salvation. I woke up in the forest, shrouded in the soft light of dawn. The air was fresh and pleasant. Keith was already awake, silhouetted against the wake of the day as he prepared to search. "We have a long journey ahead of us," Keith said as I approached. "But don't be afraid. I swear we will find your sister." Our path was quiet, but decisive. As the sun rose higher, the forest revealed its secrets. Old paths covered in moss, birds chirping, and the occasional deer skittering through the undergrowth. Keith moved with purpose, each step confident and guided, as if the forest itself were his ally, opening its paths to him. Soon the search brought results. A hidden grotto where Amelia, confused and exhausted, but unharmed, waited for salvation. Our reunion was filled with tears, and the joy that only siblings who fear they will never see each other again can share. With Amelia safe, the walk back through the forest took on a different tone. It was as if the trees themselves breathed a sigh of relief, their leaves whispering about the end of one adventure and the birth of another. Keith's story unfolded along our path, a tale of a distant land, a sage's quest, and a destiny intertwined with ours, a destiny that brought him straight to us. He spoke of enchantments and old prophecies, of his world beyond the rift that connected our worlds, the rift that Amelia had unwittingly crossed in her own wanderings. As the edge of the forest drew closer, giving way to the familiar landscape of our city, I realized that Keith's world was calling him back, and mine was here, tied to the place where I grew up. "You gave us back our hope and our family," I told Keith, my hand lingering in his as we said goodbye. "And you've given me a new purpose, Logan," he replied with a smile that was both warm and melancholy. "Perhaps one day our paths will cross again." With one last look that promised more than could be said, Keith turned and retreated back into the forest that had brought us together and now carried him away. Life resumed, and Amelia and I found the normalcy we had so desperately missed. But sometimes I found myself looking at the forest and wondering if it was just a shadow or if Keith was there, watching us. It was indeed the end of one story, but the beginning of another. For neither in our world nor in the next, I knew that this connection, that spark that lit between us, would never fade. And in the world of stories, this is how real novels begin.